Blog Talk Radio.
Alternative facts.
The following message is transmitted at the request of the United States government. At 12:07 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time, numerous unidentified objects of unknown intent and unknown origin were detected at high altitudes over multiple locations of Earth's outer space by the National Radio Astronomy Observatory, and these objects are presumed to be some form of controlled aircraft. It is not known if more of these aircraft will arrive, or if they will attempt entering Earth's atmosphere. United States citizens are encouraged to monitor local media outlets, as more updates will follow as information becomes available. The following message is transmitted at the request of the United States government. Attacks by the undead have been reported in several states across the country. The dead are rising from their graves and are attacking the human race. At this time, it is expected that more attacks of this nature will occur in several other states in the next few hours. The intent behind the attack is unknown at this time. He has been observed that a byte or exchange of fluids is a method of transmission. This is an extremely dangerous situation if they crave the taste of human flesh. It is not known whether this event will last for hours, days, or even longer. Stay calm, as authorities have been dispatched to deal with these creatures. An all-clear siren will be sounded when this situation is under control. Pacific Standard Time, nor is detected a long-range nuclear missile launcher. This missile is believed to be headed in the direction of all residents within a 400-mile radius of this area should seek a fallout shelter immediately.
Welcome to Within the Chaos with your host, Rodney the Viking Shortridge. I want to give a big old shout out to the Facebook paranormal groups that allow us to post our shows on their pages and helping us to get the word out about all of our guests. If anyone would like to speak to Black Diamond Paranormal Society, BDPS, to discuss your paranormal questions or issues, go to our website at blackdiamondps.org or email blackdiamondps@yahoo.com. As always, our services are free.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us tonight. You can listen in by calling 516-387-1922, or you can go to the Vibe Radio Network website at blogtalkradio.com/Vibe Radio Network. For deep within the heart of the Appalachian Mountains, I'd like to welcome everyone and thank you for listening to Within the Chaos. My name is Rodney Shortridge, and I'll be your host tonight. First off, I'd like to give a shout out to my cousins up in Ohio, Jennifer and Joe Shortridge of 222 Paranormal. If you get a chance, check out their talk show. You can find them on Facebook under 222 Paranormal.
Have your devices just randomly stopped working? Are you having IT trouble? Not to worry, Mead's PC Repair Shop can help. We also offer IT support too, including website hosting. We are now also offering full event management services. To find out more, contact our friendly customer service team who will gladly help in any situation. Just call 276-880-8900, or if you prefer, you can stop by our shop at 1089 St. Clair Street, Oakwood, Virginia 24631 by appointment only, or by visiting the website at meadspcshop.com for more information. Thank you.
Phantom Fest 2019 is hosted and sponsored by Black Diamond Paranormal Society, Blog Talk Radio within the Chaos and Elk Garden School Community Ministry. The Phantom Fest is geared for the like-minded and enthusiasts and researchers in the fields of the paranormal, UFOs, cryptozoology, comics, horror films, gamers, cosplay, metaphysical, spiritual, artists, authors, ancient civilizations, tattoo artists, unexplained mysteries, superheroes, FX horror artists, steampunk, costume contest, sci-fi and so much more. The Fest offers a unique and interesting outlook on the abnormal. The Phantom Fest will be held on November 2nd, 2019 at the Russell County Conference Center 139, Highland Drive, Lebanon, Virginia. Starting at 10 a.m. and going to 6 p.m. Tickets are $7 per person, ages 0 to 6 are free. Or tickets can be reduced to $5 per person with 2 non-perishable food items, to be donated to the Elk Garden School Community Ministry to help families during the Thanksgiving season. Any non-perishable food donations will be happily received. Also, we will have a free costume contest for all ages. Guest speakers, returning this year, Bill and Chris Reap of Reap Investigations, Giant researcher Heather Arnold. New to this year's Phantom Fest guest speakers, Dave Spinks, Ron Whitehead, Jake Fife, Chad Zumwalt and Whitney Benson, Amy Green, Barry Gaunt, Cosplay Bridget Baker, CNC Paranormal Investigations, Dennis Estlock, Geo Argus Girls Heather Taylor and Micah Taylor, Haunted MD Donald Molnar, Lucky Belcamino, Michelle Wagner, and Rebecca Smoot. Special appearances by Cosplay Bridget Baker, Martial Arts Christian Yaya Thompson and Token Nihilist Cosplay, Arthur Stump, Grace Ann Lehman, Raphael Bertiz and the Whiteville Ghostbusters. Find us on Facebook Phantom Fest, www.facebook.com/PhantomFest. Our website, www.phantomfest.org. Our email, phantomfest1@yahoo.com. For more information, please contact Rodney Shortridge at 276-970-1456 or Josh Mead at 276-880-8900 extension 1259.
Well, hello everybody, and I hope everybody had a great 4th of July weekend. I know I did. I took last week off because it was 4th of July. And I don't work on 4th of July, even though I do work all the time. But let's get right down to it. Tonight, our special guest is Dennis Stone, who grew up at the American Stonehenge and has been involved with the site for the last 55 years and has met a variety of researchers. Also a full-time airline captain, Dennis has traveled extensively around the world to other ancient sites in Europe and North America. He has been on numerous TV and radio shows since 1970. When he's not flying, Dennis spends his time at the American Stonehenge where his wife, Pat, manages the day-to-day operations of the site. Their son, Kinsley, who is an engineer, has taken an interest in the ongoing research. So, with no further ado, let me get this clicked over. Dennis, are you there, sir?
I am, Rodney. Thank you for having me on tonight.
Oh, thank you, sir, for coming on. It's an honor to have you on tonight. I guess I'll just start out like I do with everyone else. Yeah, just tell us a little bit about yourself and also, how you got involved with the American Stonehenge.
Oh, sure, Rod. Yeah. Actually, I recently retired a couple of years ago from the airlines after 35 years, so I'm retired, and so I'm at the museum much more now than I was when I was flying all those years. But my dad actually got going on this back in 1955. He was an AT&T Bell Laboratories engineer, and he was listening to a radio show just like what we're doing right now, a station out of Boston on a Friday night, and the whole subject of the topic of the show was all about these strange stone ruins located only about 8 miles from where he lived in a town called Derry. Derry's where Robert Frost was and Alan Shepard, the first astronaut. It's about 7 miles from our museum, and he had never heard of anything like this, so that radio show really got his attention. A few days later, he was at a barber shop waiting to have his hair cut. He was looking at a magazine, and in the main story in the magazine, the feature story was all about these same stone ruins. So that really kind of a coincidence, but really got him very, very interested in this whole thing. And another coincidence was at my aunt and uncle's the next weekend, and they were playing cards on a Friday night with about 10 or 12 people, and he had the magazine. He asked if he could keep it. It was a 1952 issue, so it was 3 years old at the barber shop. And he passed it around the table at some point, and everybody looked at it. Nobody really recognized what the story was about, or these ruins, until it got to my aunt and uncle, and they looked at it and said, gee, this is a place we used to go to back in the 1930s, and they rode their bicycles down there while they were dating, and they went up there and they picnicked a couple times. So my dad's next question is, can you find it, So that Sunday, the next day, I think the four of them went down. They drove all over the place trying to find it. Eventually they did find it, and my dad got up and went up into the main, what we call the main part of the site. There's a chain link fence surrounding the 1 acre where most of the stone ruins are located, but not all the ruins, but most of them. And he actually climbed under the fence, trespassed, and spent quite a bit of time in there where the other three were standing outside the fence. And when he finally came out, he was just totally kind of blown away by the sight. He had never seen anything like that. So that's my family's involvement with my dad. My aunt and uncle, like I mentioned, go back to the 1930s. And I had an uncle, actually, just before he passed away 3 years ago, told me his grandmother, who lived in the same town where these ruins are in Salem, New Hampshire, she had played in the ruins too when she was a kid back in the 1890s. So it goes back quite a ways with our family. So in 1955, my dad first visited it, and then he opened it up in 1958. So we just had our 61st year of being open to the public last year, actually.
Oh, wow. Well, what exactly is American Stonehenge? And, can you describe the location of the site, for everyone?
Oh, sure. Yeah, it's located about 40 miles north of Boston. We're in Salem, New Hampshire, not Salem, Massachusetts, where the witches are, which a lot of people confuse the two towns. But we're about 30 miles from Salem, Massachusetts. But we're located in southern New Hampshire. And we're the biggest city next to us is Manchester, New Hampshire, just above us, and has a big airport and everything for people coming into the area. And we're located about 20 miles from the ocean. And the closest river is the Merrimack River, one of the largest rivers in New England, not the largest, but one of the larger ones. And it comes within about 5 miles of the base of our hill. And so American Stonehenge is about 110 acres of property. It's a big hill. And on top of it are these stone ruins. The ruins cover pretty much the whole hilltop, with the majority being these stone chambers. They kind of look like something from the Fred Flintstones. They're big stone walls, big, huge stone slabs that make up the roof. And it consists of all these different features that are just not like a farm, anything like a New England farm. These chambers are what we call dry stone construction. No cement or mortar was used to put them together. The stones were not quarried using drills or anything modern. They were actually removed from the bedrock using a primitive technology. The bedrock is foliated in layers, and somehow they were able to separate these layers of stone, and then they would raise them up, prop them, and then they would do a technique called percussion flaking. And it's been verified by our late Dr. David Stewart Smith, and also the state archaeologist at the time back in the 1980s when they found the first few of these big slabs still out in the woods. And they had already been propped up, and they were being prepared to be moved, we believe, to build the site even bigger. Today we have about 33 of these big slabs located up to 1,000 feet from the main site. But it's been verified that they were shaped using the same technology that they would use to make like an arrowhead, the knapping or percussion flaking. The same technology was used to shape these big stones. We call it dressing the stone. And the site is an astronomically aligned site, too. Outside the main site of stone structures, plazas, courtyards, and one of the big features is called the sacrificial table. And it's a complete underground network of storm drains that were engineered before the site was built. There are stones surrounding this that look like very large arrowheads. These are several feet up to, the tallest is 14 feet, but they average about 6 or 7 feet tall with a couple feet planted in the ground. And it stood up vertically. And we found out starting in 1967 when the work began on the astronomical alignments that they are aligned with the sun, the moon, and stars. So it's kind of like a calendar. And thus we had the name America's Stonehenge because the function is the same as Stonehenge. The form is more like other megalithic sites in Europe. We think the site's a ceremonial site, not a living place. We think it was used for, ceremonies, possibly burials, but it was probably used during the time of the summer solstice, winter solstice, spring and fall, equinox. And we have these days called the cross-quarter days, too, which are days in between the seasons. And also aligned with the moon. We have the next lunar major standstill come up in 2025, so we're kind of excited about that. The moon goes through these extremes over 18 and a half years. Stonehenge tracks that, and some of the other 50,000 sites and megalithic sites in Western Europe also track that. And there are sites, mounds in the United States, particularly in Ohio. There's something like 10,000 mounds, or there were. And some of these are actually lined up with the lunar standstills, too, besides some of the solar alignments. So it's a calendar site, and we think it was a place where they did worshiping, and it was not a place where the people lived, though. They probably lived in hide, wood, or bark homes in the surrounding area, but not on top of this hill. But our site is not the only site. We began this in the 1950s, but somebody called, William Goodwin actually began work on our site in 1936. At that time, they knew of about 12 sites in New England. Today we know from Canada all the way down to the mid-Atlantic states there are stone structures that are very, very similar to what we have at our site. The size, the shape, and the orientation of the structures are very, 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 very similar. And that's something that we've only discovered in the last couple decades. So it's not just a unique site. The uniqueness about our site is it has just about everything every other site has. It's like the Reader's Digest version. But there are other sites all over the landscape, and we think they may be related to our site. And our site dates back to about 4,000 years, we believe, from the carbon datings and the astronomical data we have on the site.
Okay, well, that kind of goes into my next question. So, what evidence, that you found that that you can explain that you think it's a megalithic stone structure that predates Columbus arriving in America?
Right, great question. Yeah. Well, we've been taught that there are no ancient stone ruins in the Northeast. That's, but they pretty much taught in schools and everything. We don't think that's correct. The carbon datings, we have taken 12 of these starting in 1967. And the oldest charcoal, and it has to be in a certain context to like a wall or a structure. That's very, very important. But the oldest charcoal that came out of the site came just north of what we call the Chamber of Ruins. And it's kind of a trapezoid-shaped structure. It has a huge stone roof that's fallen into it. At some time in the past, the roof actually fell in. It weighs around 6,000 or 7,000 pounds. And it had a stone lintel that weighs about 1,000 pounds over the doorway that also fell in at the same time. That chamber is interesting because we have 3 different inscriptions that have come out of that in the 1960s. It has 2 windows, of course, a doorway. And on the north wall, there was actually a tree growing through the wall. And in the 1930s, when Mr. Goodwin was there, they took photographs of the stump. It was very decayed. They couldn't do dendrochronology, the tree ring data, and just couldn't do it because it was so rotted. But they did estimate that this white pine tree began growing there in the 1600s because of the state of decay and the diameter of it. And as we know, we wouldn't build a structure around the tree. The tree would actually grow into the structure. The roots would penetrate through the walls. So 30 years later, in 1967, they actually did an excavation on that north wall, and they actually went down several inches, and they found, and they recorded it, both with photographs and diagrams in the report. They actually extracted the piece of root, sent it to Geochrome Laboratories in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and the date came back about 1690 AD. Some people had felt that the site was built by a colonial, post-colonial family called the Paddies, and they bought the first piece of property there in 1734, followed by another piece of property in 1744. They were actually shoemakers, 5 generations of shoemakers, and they did have some domesticated animals. But this would actually precede that time by, 40 or 50 years, something like that. So that kind of put the Patty thing to rest, at least on that particular chamber, that this tree had already started growing sometime around 1690, and the roots, had gone through the structure, and that's plus or minus a few years. 1969, they went down below that area, in that same area, and they laid out, I think, a 3 by 3 foot square. Today they use meter squares, the metric system. They went down several inches of sterile soil. They didn't find anything as you were digging very slowly, and it was kind of frustrating for the archaeologists. And finally, they got down several inches. I think it was about 18 inches, and they found charcoal, and they right up against the wall, and they recorded the stratigraphy, all the color bands, so there was no disturbance by people. The soil had very, very slowly accumulated next to that north wall over a long, long time, and it's all different color bands representing different ages. But they did get down, and they found not only charcoal, but they found hammerstone, rubbing stone, and stone scrapers. So stone tools were found right in that mix of charcoal. That charcoal, again, was sent to Geochrome Laboratories in 1969, and the results was about 3,000 years, plus or minus, I think, 200 years. And in 1971, they went down further still, and they found more stone tools, and they also found more charcoal, which they dated to 4,000 years old, plus or minus about 250 years. Below that, the bedrock had been removed artificially. Somebody had removed the bedrock for building material, so they quarried it, built a wall, and then after that, the soil began accumulating. Charcoal and stone tools came in later. So the first thing that happened is the quarrying of the bedrock, using it for stone, walls or whatever, and then building the wall. 1971, we began the astronomical survey of the site. We had begun looking at the astronomy in 1967, but we actually began hiring a professional survey team to come up. And for the next several years, they came up occasionally, and they do survey of the walls, the astronomical alignments. By 1977, they fed that data to the Harvard-Smithsonian Center for Astrophysics in Cambridge, Massachusetts. And the results came back in the spring of 1978. And the results, they said, if these stone markers were used to align with the sun, moon, or stars, they won't work today. However, they would work approximately 1800 BC, plus or minus 200 years. And that's because the Earth has a wobble. One of the wobbles is the cycle of the obligity. And the Earth's tilt actually changes very slowly over 41,000 years. The other cycle is the precession of the equinox, which is just under 26,000 years, and that changes the zodiac, signs of the zodiac. It also changes the pole stars and our seasons. So we were looking at both of these wobbles, basically, and what the Harvard-Smithsonian Center, basically they would work about 1800 BC. And that's about the same time period as that 1971 charcoal, which was, they kind of correlated, they kind of backed up one another on the date. The other part of that report, they said, is you have 24 star alignments, and we knew of one of them, which is Polaris today, 4,000 years ago. The North Star was actually Thuban, part of Draco the dragon. And we do have some walls at our site, we can talk about, that are actually shaped like serpents. We found about 12 of them there just in the last couple of years. These are pretty good sized walls. One of them is about 2,550 feet. So they seem to be interested in the heavens, constellations, stars, sun, and moon. And that seems to be something that they brought down to Earth, and it's in our walls, basically. So the date's about 4,000 years old, Rodney.
Okay, wow. Well, that goes into my next question. What have you found unusual about the stones at the site?
Let's see. I mean, as far as the stonework, the chambers, what type of thing in particular were you thinking of?
Just anything that's unusual about any of the stones, as far as where they're cut, the type of the way they were laid, put together, stuff like that. Where were they quarried at, and how distances,
Oh, sure. Yeah, that's really important. I know many people, again, in the past thought maybe it was a colonial, post-colonial, construction, but there are only about 12 modern drill marks, those circular drill marks that you see even on the highway state, but those are very large ones. But these are smaller ones, and they used a plug and feather back starting around 1800 to split stones. And there's about 12 of those on the site, and that was due to the Patty family being there, and they had some of the stones taken away by what they call local quarrymen. Came up, took some rocks, and they're building some local projects. So they were recycling some of the stones, actually damaging the site. and today it's estimated between a quarter and maybe a third or more of the sites missing because of that quarry activity. It took place over 3 years, I guess, seasonally, taking carload after carload of rock away in the 1850s. And that's true of a lot of ancient sites around the world. Unfortunately, they get damaged and they get recycled and sometimes destroyed. But the original stone builders, they actually, again, they work the bedrock, and they work the cracks or fractures in the bedrock, and they were actually able to separate it. And the bedrock is foliated. It's kind of like an onion, comes up in layers. But they're able to raise it, and they would prop it with a stone maybe a foot or two across. And again, we have about 33 of these still sitting out in the woods. And they would actually start hammering the edge. And the edges of these stones actually has like a scalloping, kind of serrated edge, if you will. And in 1983, after they found the very first one still out in the woods, they excavated along the front of it. And Dr. David Stewart Smith conducted that dig, and then he brought in the state archaeologist at the time, and he said, unmistakable, this stone is the same kind of process that that the ancient people used to make either arrowheads, stone knives, or any stone implement like. And so it's not a modern age type of thing, a modern, and the quarry sites themselves have no drill marks either. So people might say, well, maybe they knocked off some of the stone and you can't see the drill marks anymore, But the drill marks are not in the quarry either. So that the modern drills were not used to extract these stones from the bedrock. But the structures look very similar to megalithic sites. And for the listeners, they're probably familiar with Stonehenge. Pretty much everybody in the world is. But there's about 50,000 megalithic sites in Western Europe. And you can look at our site, and we have similar features. We have a structure called the V-hut. It looks like the letter V as in Victor. And it's the only chamber on the site that's not orientated with its axis towards north, south, east, and west, the 4 cardinal points. It's actually facing the southwest, kind of the winter solstice sunset direction. In Ireland, there are chambers called wedge tombs, and my dad and I visited some of these back in the 1980s when we went to Ireland, and we went to quite a bit, England, Wales, Scotland. But in Ireland, we visited some of these wedge tombs, and the wedge tombs always face southwest in Ireland. And our chamber, again, is the same shape, size, and direction of orientation as the wedge tombs of Ireland. Next to our V-hut, there's a chamber we call the east-west chamber, and it's orientated true east and west, not magnetic, but it's true east and west, and it runs about just under 30 feet. In Ireland, and also in Holland they're called the Giant's Bed, and in France, which I visited too, they have these same type of chambers, and they run 20 to 60 feet in length. They're used as tombs, as ancient tombs, and they're referred to as galley or gallery graves, and they're always orientated, again, true east and west, just like our chamber. And our chamber has these big slabs, not only in the roof, but also the walls. They're vertical slabs called orthostats, and this is true of some of the megalithic sites in Europe. In that chamber, I mentioned with the carbon data, we call it the Chamber in Ruins. I saw one just like that in Carnac in France, one of the coolest megalithic sites in Europe. It's got like, I think, 3,500 standing stones in a rows. People have probably seen these on TV. And it also has chambers, and it has monoliths. It has menhirs, which are really long stones. One of the biggest, it was like an obelisk. We visited that, and it was originally about 65 feet tall, 350 tons. It was dragged a couple miles and originally stood up, and it was a lunar observatory. But right next to that, there's a chamber, and it looked just like our chamber in ruins, except the roof was still intact to it. And again, the orientation, so the size, the shape, and orientation are very, very similar to what we have in megalithic sites in Europe. But megalithic sites go into Russia, they go into China, India, Korea. Korea had about 80,000 of these megalithic type sites. And megalithic just means huge stone structures. Recently in Australia, they found them, South America. And I was told about a month ago New Zealand has them, and I haven't seen any photographs, and I can't verify if they do and do not, but I guess it wouldn't surprise me because they seem to be on 6 out of 7 continents, except for the Antarctic. So it seems to be a worldwide kind of thing with megalithic sites.
Mm-hmm. Well, what is the estimated weight of the heaviest stone on your site?
Yeah, that would be on the Oracle Chamber, which is we haven't discussed the Oracle Chamber, but it's one of the most intact and largest chamber, and it's actually quite sophisticated. There's actually a very, very large glacial stone in there, but it's been busted in two, either by nature or man did it. And the part that they moved, the smaller part, weighs about 50 tons. So about 100,000 pounds roughly. And then they basically built the structure around this whole thing. And the structure is shaped like a letter Y. If you were to stand above it, you could look through the roof. It would look like the letter Y. And it does run true north, south, east, and west. It has 5 stone closets or niches inside of it. It has what we call the bed. It's about an 8-foot hollow space in the wall. It's all built. A very large person could get into that, and it actually has its own window where you can actually lay in there. You could actually look through this window, just a hole in the wall. It's rectangular, and you can see pretty much inside of the whole chamber. We don't know what its purpose was originally, but it's horizontal, and it looks like a bed kind of. It has a tube called a speaking tube or oracle tube, and outside on the west side of the structure, there's a big stone called the sacrificial table, and it's one of the main features of the site. It's kind of bell-shaped. It weighs about 9,000 pounds. We know it's quartzite. It has the same shape as a table. Again, no drill marks. And somebody moved it about 40 feet from that quarry site, and then they moved it and they set it up on 4 stone legs. And the main axis of it is facing true east and west. The table has a groove on it that's actually discovered recently. It's not rectangular. It's actually a deep trapezoidal-shaped groove. And it has a runnel, and below the runnel, it's kind of hard to describe it, but there's actually a cutout in the bedrock where, like, a vase, perhaps a gourd vase or a stone vase or a ceramic vase could sit in it and collect the fluid. But the oracle chamber is connected to that sacrificial table by a 6-foot horizontal tube. And when you stand inside the oracle chamber facing to the west and you're looking through this tube, you're actually looking underneath the sacrificial table 6 feet away. If you yell through that tube, the voice will come out underneath the sacrificial table, and people standing opposite the oracle chamber and the table, there's a big ramp where people could actually stand and observe a ceremony. And looking down on top of the table, if you heard this voice coming out, it'd be kind of like the Wizard of Oz, you know. I've been to Delphi in Greece. I've also been to Malta where they have these holes in the wall. And I asked one of the guides in Malta, for instance, I said, what is that? What is that? And he goes, that hole there is an oracle tube where people would speak. So people would hear a voice coming out and they would get guidance, or, you know, maybe kind of like the Wizard of Oz, kind of, you know, scaring the people or something like that. But that's what we think the structure was used for, because you cannot tell there's a chamber there. Although it's very big, you can't see it from when you're standing above the table looking down at the table. It looks just like a big pile of, you know, part of the bedrock, actually. It was well concealed, in other words. But it has 2 carvings, one of what they call a deer carving. It looks more like a Spanish ibex animal. And it has an arrow carving. It has 2 underground drains. These are like tunnels, and these keep the structure dry even under the heaviest rain or snow melt each year. And it has a fireplace, actually a chimney flue. And the chimney flue had 2 stone louvers, and in the year we opened in 1958, somebody stole them, but we have photographs. So they actually had adjustable stone louvers that would actually adjust the draft if that's what it was used for. So it's quite a sophisticated chamber. And part of the inside of it is just vertical stacking of stone. You were asking about the way the stones are laid. You get into the east-west part of that chamber, and it's all corbel. That's the inverted staircase, kind of like a false arch, if you will. It's a different kind of style to the construction of it. And it is a style used in old world structures in England, for instance, and other megalithic sites. So, but it is quite an interesting chamber. You know, you think of farmer or shoemaker, because the patties are shoemakers, building something like that, you know, it's like, you know, what would they ever use it for?
Mm-hmm. Well, who do you think built the site?
Yeah, that's the million-dollar question. Who do you think built it? It does have a very strong resemblance, as I say, to Western Europe. We mentioned some sites in, you know, England and Ireland, but Spain is one of the candidate places that some of the researchers for the last, I would say, 45 years almost have looked at Spain, because the structures, again, are very, very similar to our site. But the inscriptions that were found at our site, according to Dr. Barry Fell from Harvard University, were Phoenician inscriptions, Libyan, and Celtic. And he said these 3 inscriptions, the style of them, I guess, is the same as what you find in the Iberian Peninsula of Spain and Portugal. And I mentioned that deer carving before. If you look up an ibex, they'll show different animals. But if you look at the Spanish ibex animal, it looks just like our deer carving, for instance. But the structures over there, and I've Vihat that I mentioned before looks like some of the ones you can find in Spain, down to little cutouts on the roof. Looks just like ours, in a stone basin in front of ours. One of the ones I saw, I've been to Spain, but I didn't get a chance to visit this particular structure, but it looks just like ours. The same features, you know, not just the structure, but features next to the structure are the same too. But Barry felt that Spain and Portugal was the melting pot. The Phoenicians were there, the Celts were there, and the Libyans were there. And he said the style of inscriptions found not only at our site, but these inscriptions are found from North America and South America and in Central America too. He said the style matches that area of the world more than anywhere else, you know, more than in where the land of Phoenicia is on the, they call it the Phoenician coast, where Syria, Jordan, Lebanon, and the Golan Heights are. That's where the Phoenicians, they believe, came out of and went across the Mediterranean, for instance, heading west, and Carthage is one of the cities. But the style of script in Spain seems to match Libyan, Phoenician, and Celtic that are found at our site and other sites. So that might be a candidate from where, you know, we think these people may have originated from.
Okay. Well, is there any evidence that maybe some other people may have built on to the site at a later date?
That's a great question. Yeah, that's a really good question, because it does have we got to do more archaeological research. We've only excavated about 1% of the hilltops, so about 1 acre out of about 106 acres. And I'm sure there's just so much up there we're going to find. But a lot of people that have worked on the site feel like it's like a layering of cultures. So it could have been used for a while, abandoned, and then reused by different cultures, perhaps. We know Native Americans were in New Hampshire going back over 10,000 years. In fact, our archaeologist, she's kind of a professional in that. She was a president of the New Hampshire Archaeological Society, so she's well-versed in colonial and Native American, archaeological, excavations and sites that she's worked on for over 40 years. And so we know Native Americans were here, and then the question is, how much involvement did they do on our site? Anywhere from 100% to partial involvement to no involvement with our site. But again, the site does have a flavor of those megalithic sites over in Europe. I don't think that's a coincidence. But yeah, it's kind of a layering of cultures. And one thing, when we found, just in the last couple of years, we went from finding only a few of those big slabs out in the woods that were quarried, up to about, I think we have 33 now. Since I retired a couple of years ago, we found about 20 more. And all of a sudden it dawned on us that maybe the site was never complete. Maybe it was a work in progress, and then these people abandoned the whole thing. And it was kind of a revelation. It's like, wow, maybe these guys were doing something, and then something happened, and they left. They weren't done with it, and then used it, and then abandoned it. They were still working on it. So that raised another question. What happened to these people?
Well, do you think it may have anything to do with the catastrophe that they talk about? I know a lot of historians and other people that research ancient sites talk about where sites haven't been finished, that something happened to stop them, and it could have been like the melting of the ice packs, or warming up the planet and so forth. Do you think it might have something to do with that?
Yeah, we thought about that. Yeah, was it possibly they weren't getting along with their neighbors here? Maybe the disease, or maybe the climate changed, like you mentioned, maybe that was an effect on them. It could be a number of different things. Maybe they just moved on to another area for some reason. Like you say, maybe they had some enemies here. Maybe it was climatic. Maybe, some sort of a disease. But around 3,000 years ago, the Iron Age began, and before that, the Bronze Age, and you need copper and tin to make bronze, and you can't find that everywhere. You have to travel great distances, and it's kind of expensive, Not everybody could afford to get bronze. So when the Iron Age came, iron's pretty much everywhere, whether it's bog iron or, iron, just, deposits or whatever. It's pretty available, and that being the case, that seemed to be kind of towards the end of the megalithic building era too, where even small communities, or communities without much money or means, could actually make iron tools, utensils, weapons, and they could war on one another. And that's when a lot of these forts, like Old Sarum, I saw right near, not too far from Stonehenge, and that was an Iron Age fort. And it was quite a complex, but I think that started just about the time they stopped making the megalithic type of sites. They started building more defensive kind of sites, I think. I may be a little simplistic, but iron is cheap. Once you get the temperatures to smelt iron, it's very cheap and just about anybody can afford it. So some people thought maybe that's the reason, maybe they weren't coming to America. One of the places I think they got copper was the Isle Royale up in Lake Superior. There's like 500,000 tons that we're taking out of there, and they can't account for all the copper in North America. What the thought is some of this was being transported back to the old world. And then they would get tin from different tin mines. I think Bolivia, there's tin, and because there's tin mines in the old world too. And they would mix these two together to create bronze. And maybe when the Iron Age came, they didn't have that economic reason to really come to the Americas as much. Maybe that was about the time period too that possibly our site was abandoned. We're not totally clear on that, but it seems that could have been one of the answers too. Economic.
Well, with all the researchers that has investigated the site, who were they and what were their findings on the site?
Yeah, there's been, like I say, the research began on our site in 1936. It was William Goodwin of Hartford, Connecticut, and Goodwin was an antiquarian. He was very, very interested in the Vikings, and he wrote a book called The Truth About Leif Erikson. He was interested in ancient Irish monks coming to the Americas too. And the monks, he felt the Viking sagas do talk about these white-robed men that were preceding them, whether it was in the Faroe Islands, I think, and then across the North Atlantic, Iceland, Greenland, into North America, just before the Vikings, were coming across. And so he wrote a book called The Ruins of Great Ireland and New England, and kind of featured our site mostly, but he did talk about some of the other 12 sites that they knew about in the Northeast also. So Goodwin was really one of the first to do any work, and he hired a crew to dig, clean, and do restoration on the site. His belief initially was it was a Viking settlement, but as they got rid of all the brush and all the debris on our site, it became clear it wasn't really a Viking site. So he changed his mind to an Irish Coldy monk monastery. And some of the other 12 sites in New England also he felt were monasteries too, to convert the Native Americans into Christianity. And also they were here just to escape Viking persecution, for instance, trying to stay away from the Vikings. And he died in 1950 still believing that, because today we have the evidence that the site goes back about 3,000 years earlier than his theory. And there's been different groups that have worked on it, like Junius Bird from the American Museum of Natural History, Gary Vesalius back in the 1940s. He's from Yale University, worked on our site. Hugh Hecken from Peabody Museum at Harvard was on our site. Different people, were involved with the research over the years. In the 1950s, there's a group formed called the Early Sites Foundation, and that ran until 1964, so for about 10 years. And some of these researchers were from Dartmouth College. There were two, Hugh Morrison and Beltimer Stephenson, if I pronounce his name correctly. They still have a center named after him, the Arctic Center, I guess, up in Dartmouth. And they were very, very interested in, were there old world visitors to the new world, and were these stone ruins, a piece of evidence to support that. By 1964, a number of these members passed away, so the group dissolved, and then a new group started called the New England Antiquities Research Association, and the acronym it's actually called NERA. But my dad started the group in 1964, the same year that the Early Sites Foundation dissolved. The group's still going very strong today, and they're one of the groups that are working on a lot of the sites in the Northeast. And they have twice-a-year meetings, and they do field trips to these sites. They're actually doing new dating techniques, and we're expecting a date out of a site down in Pennsylvania. And I believe they're using a technique called what do they call it? Optically, I'm trying to think of the name of it, OSL, optically stimulated luminescence. They can take cores of dirt, and they can actually date how long the dirt's been next to a structure or wall, and actually kind of date the structure indirectly. And they're waiting for results this month, as a matter of fact, of a terraced kind of structure in Pennsylvania. And so we're waiting any day to hear how old that thing is. They think it's ancient. But so NERA's been around for over 55 years, and a lot of the members from that group have done work, and those carbon datings I mentioned starting in '67 were done by some of the NERA members. The inscriptions were looked at by not only Dr. Barry Fell and his group called the Epigraphic Society. I think he had 1,200 members, and he was in Harvard University for 20 years, and then he retired to the Southwest, I think in San Diego, before he passed away. But there have been people from Texas A&M and different universities, colleges, and institutions that have worked on our site over the last, actually, 8 years now.
Wow. Well, have you found any evidence of any like they have any written language or hieroglyphs or pictographs or anything that would explain their culture?
Yeah, they have, you know, and as I mentioned, Barry Fell was the guy that actually visited us in 1975, and he was originally from New Zealand. He got his education, I believe, in England, and then he came to the States, and he was at Harvard University. And he first visited 1975, but 1964 in that chamber in ruins, they were doing the one that we got the 3 carbon datings from on the north wall I mentioned a little while ago. They found 2 stone, kind of triangular stones found near the entrance of the chamber in ruins because they were doing some cleaning and excavation. And one of the things goals was actually to take the 6,000-pound roof slab and get it out of there. It's still in there today, and they never get it out. But their attempt was to try to get that stone out of there with that 1,000-pound lintel stone, and then excavate the floor because it's never been done before. Those 2 big stones are actually on top of original soil that's been in there for years. So we still would love to do that. So they found these 2 stones, and they had markings on them. They put them on display in our museum, and they were there for about 11 years. And Dr. Barry Fell was brought to the site by some members of that NERA organization, and he began studying the markings. And he came up with 3 different types, as I kind of mentioned earlier, Libyan, Phoenician, and Celtic that were found. And they were found in that chamber, actually, or around that chamber. And they've been found in Vermont. Vermont has many of these chambers, and that's where the most inscriptions are found in the Northeast or up in Vermont. The most structures are actually found on the Hudson River in Putnam and Westchester County of New York. That has the most chambers. And the town with the most structures is a place called North Stonington, Connecticut. There's over 8,000 features in that one town. So, and we call that one site. And that one site has, like I mentioned, 8,000 features. And they do have inscriptions. So these inscriptions have been found, again, all across America to the west coast, all the way down to Brazil. And mostly they've been found as Phoenician, Libyan, and Celtic. And I think they found some, I think you call it Paleo-Hebrew, I think it is, markings too, and some other Semitic script too, across the Americas. But our type at our site are the Libyan, Celtic, and Phoenician at our site.
So have you found, or have they been other sites like really close to your area that resemble your American Stonehenge, or is yours just unique?
Yeah, I mean, our site's unique in that we have, it's kind of like the Reader's Digest. If there's a chamber in a different part of the Northeast, we have a structure that looks like that. We have the serpentine walls. These are walls shaped like serpents, and these are found elsewhere in New England and New York. And everything's kind of condensed at our site. Like North Stonington, it's spread out over 35,000 acres, you know, these structures, and they have 25 of these chambers. Some people have called these stone chambers, you know, the ones with the walls and the big stone roofs, root cellars. You know, that's been their answer, that they're colonial or post-colonial root cellars. 90% of these chambers in New England have no ventilation, and if you don't have ventilation, you put your vegetables inside for the winter inside the chamber. They won't be preserved. They'll rot. These chambers sit on bedrock, and they usually have bedrock floors, like the Oracle chamber you walk in. It's all bedrock. Root cellars generally are inside of basements of homes, not always though, but they usually have ventilation, like I mentioned, and they also have clay floors or some sort of gravel floors, and these are bedrock. And these chambers, the entrances are actually facing, in almost all the cases, they're facing like a summer solstice, winter solstice, a spring and fall equinox. They might be facing also like a constellation like the Pleiades. There's a chamber called the Upton Chamber in Upton, Massachusetts, and it resembles what they call I'm trying to think of the structure. It looks like an igloo, actually. And over in Europe, they had the same kind of structures, but the entrance, if you look and you stood inside the chamber and you look, on a certain day, the sun might rise on an equinox right through the entrance, only during that time. And the one down in Upton actually is, I think it's aligned with the equinox, but it also is aligned with the Pleiades, the constellation of the Seven Sisters, and it's actually aligned with that. And so farmers weren't really interested in that kind of orientation if they were using these for root cellars. But these have gigantic stone roofs, you know, and I've seen a few root cellars around before. I worked on a farm back about 50 years ago in Derry, New Hampshire. There was a concrete bunker, you know, I think it had a wooden roof on it. It was facing kind of into the woods. It didn't have any particular orientation. And they put vegetables in there to keep everything cool, you know, for storage. So, you know, to call these things all root cellars, I don't think is correct. But these structures are all over the landscape. There's, I'd say, over 800 sites, but one site like North Stonington has 8,000 features. So it's not just our site, as some people imagine. Well, it's just an isolated site. And if there was an ancient culture of stone builders, how come we don't find out, you know, there's other sites around? But indeed there are. The closest chamber to us, I believe, is there's one in Danville, New Hampshire, and it's facing the, I think it's the, we were just there this year looking at it. I think it's the winter solstice, I think, sunset, I think. There's one in Windham, New Hampshire, that's about 5 miles away, and it's facing the, I think it's a true south alignment on that. And then we have one in Plastow, New Hampshire, and he's only about 7 miles away from our site. And that one's facing the equinox sunset, I think it is, spring and fall equinox. And again, dry stone, no cement, no drill marks, and big stone roofs, no ventilation. And they have they usually sit on bedrock. Sometimes there's a little bit of silt inside the structure that's come in over the years and blown in there or washed in there. So they're all around us, actually. You know, these structures are all over the place with no historical idea, you know, record of who built these things, you know. If you go back and look at the town records, these things they've always been there. Wow.
Well, have any human or animal remains been found on the site?
Yeah, there's a couple of bones we have on display in our museum. One of them is only about, probably 2 inches. It's a very small bone, but it has a drill hole in it. And that drill hole is important because somebody drilled into it. And this was found around 1958 in a satellite structure. It's outside the main site, and this chamber is called the Watch House. And it's a gigantic glacial erratic or boulder with a structure built all around it, if you can envision that. And the structure, in 1958, they were excavating it, and they found the bone with a hole in it. And they also found next to it a stone, a small triangular, maybe about an inch and a half long. We have them on display again, in a triangular shape, and it has a hole drilled through it also. We think they were used as pendants. So that, you know, kind of raised the question, you know, why were they in that structure? Was it a burial structure, or did somebody just lose them in there, or was it an offering place inside the chamber? We just don't know. But we didn't find any other, you know, human bones or anything else in that chamber. But bones in New England, because the soil is so acidic, bones only last 200 or 300 years. And occasionally, like the New Hampshire Archaeological Society, we'll find bones going back a few thousand years. I think they're either found in clay or peat, like a peat bog or something like that. But generally speaking, in New England, the bones dissolve pretty quickly within a few hundred years, so which is too bad. If you looked at our east-west chamber, which looks like some of the gallery graves, as I mentioned earlier, if Mr. Goodwin hadn't cleaned these things out down to the bedrock, because there was some, you know, soil and rubble and stuff like that, they got in there and they cleaned it out. If he had sent that soil to a laboratory, they could check it for chemical traces, maybe like potassium, you know, something like that, calcium maybe, and it would tell them that there's probably a human burial. But unfortunately, Mr. Goodwin just used sifters and trowels and shovels, and they sifted, and they were looking for artifacts you could hold in your hand back 80 years ago. They didn't have all those tests that we have. And even the V-Hut had some soil in it, too. I don't know if it would go back to the time of the structure being built, but if it was, and it was remains of human bones or some animal bones or something like that, then again, they could have tested the soil and said, yeah, you know, this looks like it probably was a burial site. But Mr. Goodwin, again, cleaned it out and basically destroyed the evidence by doing that. So, you know, but other bones have been found on the hill, too. Back in 1970, they sent some bones to a museum, I think. I'm trying to remember if it was Boston or New York, and the museum reported back that it was a human bone, but they didn't have any DNA testing back then in the 1970s. So all we know is it looked like it was human, but we didn't get a date on it. They didn't carbon date it. And so it's kind of a mystery as to what this bone is or was,
I know I was talking about cataclysm that people and researchers have talked about that happened about 14,000 years ago. What is your opinion about that, seeing that there's so many megalithic sites across the planet, and a lot of that buildings seem to have stopped at that time? Do you think that maybe something did happen, and maybe there's some kind of lost technology, or we people that they're walking around with amnesia, especially with the building techniques that they used that a lot of we can't duplicate today? What is your opinion about that?
Yeah, it does seem like when you look at something like Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, going back, that site I think is about 11,600 years old. I think that's the last date I had on that. Pretty amazing what they did. Actually, at the beginning of the construction of that site, they seemed to move larger stones. They dressed them better than they did later. I think it was about a 1,500-year building period there, I believe. I read the later generations, the stones were smaller and cruder. So the earliest people building Göbekli Tepe were actually, they did it more, it was more sophisticated actually, and it was astronomically aligned, and they had like the serpent room, and I think they had the lion room, and then the fox would represent a comet, I think, which might be, in their memory, maybe a comet crashing to Earth, causing the Younger Dryas, that little ice age that occurred after the last ice age ended around 15,000 years ago, and then there was a warm-up, and then you went into the little ice age of the Younger Dryas, And some people think that I guess it's a fox, might be representing a comet, and the comet, crashing to Earth, and it was in their collective memory, causing, great destruction, I guess. But Göbekli Tepe just stands way out, because I went to Malta, and they thought 20 years ago when I was there, they said Malta is the oldest, megalithic ruins in the world. And with Göbekli Tepe, the time period goes back, I guess, about 5,500 years before that now, which is really amazing. It shouldn't be there. So
yeah.
And then you had the Stonehenge was started around 5,000 years ago, and then but there are sites all around there, like in France, that go back a little bit earlier, like 6,000 years ago, and then you get into Malta, which is around that time period, and a few other sites too that go back. But yeah, it's a great question. Why did Göbekli Tepe happen? Almost 6,000 years before Stonehenge. And then what happened in between? Was there a dark age? So and they keep making new discoveries all the time. I mean, every time you turn on TV or go on the internet, and there's like a new site coming up, or Facebook has a lot of that too. New sites and chambers coming up. But it could have been our site, like our site. What happened to the people there? We just don't know. Was it something that was environmental? We just we have no idea at this time.
Well, with the serpent being so significant, it seems like around the world for these ancient peoples, and also if you think about it in religious texts, what do you think the serpent is so important to these past people, and I would say even today, if you go by the Bible?
Right, it's in the Bible. Adam and Eve, St. Paddy chasing out the serpent worship in Ireland. We went to Ireland, and there was never any snakes there, but that's some symbolic, the serpent worship. But at the time of our site, the pole star, as I mentioned, would be Thuban, and Thuban is part of Draco, the serpent or dragon constellation. And so 4,000 years ago, if you're looking, we have a stone that is actually aligned with true north. And today, if you go up there at night, you can see Polaris above at the end of the hand of the Little Dipper. But due to precession, that's changed. And 4,000 years ago, you would have looked at Draco, and in the course of the evening, you would see Draco kind of rotating around Thuban. And the Egyptians thought that was a gateway to heaven, the North Star. And other cultures probably thought that was very, very important too. I know they had their own mythology about it and their ideas and beliefs about it, but that would have been a very, very important thing, that dragon or a snake in the sky rotating. And even, like I mentioned, Göbekli Tepe, one of the rooms was a serpent room, 11,600 years ago. But there's a serpent goddess, too, that's found in the Middle East. And I think it goes across part of the Mediterranean, even into part of Europe, that serpent. So the Phoenicians even worship the serpent, too. So people, we have the serpent walls at our site. It does have a kind of a flavor about Native American because of the Great Serpent Mound in Ohio. It's pretty famous. And there are some other serpent mounds out west. I think the number I heard last was about 94 in this country, and one in Canada. There's a couple in Canada, but I think there's a serpent one in Canada. And on America on Earth with Scott Walters, they showed a serpent in Scotland, and I think it was partly natural, partly man-made. It was a beautiful serpent. They adapted part of a geological formation into the serpent. But it seems to be a worldwide, whether it's in China or over here, South America. No matter where you go in the world, the serpent seems to be one of the ancient things people worshipped. In our site, we found, starting about 3 years ago, I found the first one was about 30 feet long, and it was just a straight wall. It had this funny stone on one end and had a flat stone like a flat tail on the other end. I looked at it. It's on bedrock. It's on a ridge of bedrock, but it falls off just on the other side. The bedrock just drops down. And I said, geez, that looks like a serpent. We've been going by that thing for years. And I knew it was a wall there, but this brush, you have to kind of walk over to it to look at it, which I did that day. And I said, I think I got a serpent. And I was not aware that there are others in the Northeast or elsewhere in this country. And it just dawned on me. After that, I found a couple more. And then I had some people from History Channel up, a bunch of people. I took them on a tour, and I was showing them these. And they were going like, yeah, that is kind of interesting. But we didn't know what to make out of it. But 6 months later, in the fall of 2016, we were at a meeting in Connecticut at one of the New England Antiquities Research Association meetings, and the gentleman got up and started talking about North Stonington Connecticut having over 400 serpent walls, and they range from 30 feet up to 300 feet, and they have a head, a body, and a tail. Sometimes the body has a bulge in it, like the snake ate its prey, and most of them are either straight or linear. Some are rectilinear, and some are actually curved. And I said, oh, my God, that's what I got at our site. The three that I knew of sounded just like what they were showing, and they had the guy up there showing it on a PowerPoint presentation. And he also had his book there he was selling. And I'm like, oh, my God, this is what we got at our site. Since then, we found about 9 more at our site. One of them is 2,550 feet long, starting at the chamber I mentioned where we found the bone and stone pendant, the watch house. And this wall actually starts at the watch house, and it undulates up and down. And the first up and down bump, if you will, or hump, is actually a astronomical alignment. And then it continues and it touches every astronomical alignment stone with the sun, moon, and stars at our site, what we call foresights. You have a back sight and a foresight to have an astronomical alignment. It's like looking through a gun sight. And the foresights are all these standing stones that look like arrowheads. This wall, which you think is part of the serpent itself, actually touches every one of these stones. It goes around counterclockwise, and after 2,550 feet, it comes back in front of itself, and it does one more hump, and then it does a 90-degree turn for a tail, and it's kind of a pointed tail. What it looks like is the head of the serpent is actually biting its tail. And I don't know if you've heard of the Ouroboros. It's a serpent biting its tail, and it means eternity. While I was showing this to some of our visitors, one of the people pulled out their phone and showed me some artwork from Greek, and it is the Ouroboros of a serpent wrapped around biting its tail, and it means eternity. But the serpent can mean different things, to different people and different cultures, But that's the biggest one we have. It's about twice as long as the Great Serpent Mound in Ohio, which is about 1,350 feet long. And then we have others that actually have windows in them. These are actually beautiful linteled stone windows. And we started finding these only about 3 years ago. Again, right after I retired, for some reason after I retired, I started finding a bunch of these things up there, and nobody had ever seen before. And other people have too, not just myself, but it's like, wow, we got these windows. And come to find out, these things are found in North Stonington also, and they're also found out in the Berkshires at some of the other serpent walls in western Massachusetts. Same kind of thing. And then since then, we found out that these serpent walls are actually in Colorado and the eastern part, east of Denver, where it gets very flat. Not only do they have serpent walls, but they have other features that are like our site in that area, including we have one wall that's shaped like the letter D as in Delta. It's the same shape. And these are found in North Stonington, Connecticut. They're found up in Vermont and a couple other states, but they're also found out in Colorado. And in Colorado, they have cairns and they have some standing stones. Again, you'd think you're looking at some of the New England sites 2,000 miles away. Alabama has the same kind of thing with cairns, standing stones, and they also have what they call rattlesnake walls. And I saw a diagram. I haven't seen the photographs of them, but they look just like ours. The same kind of layout to the wall with a head, a body, and a tail. And ours generally are facing southwest, except for the one that wraps itself around 2,500 feet in a big loop. That one just goes around in a big circle, actually counterclockwise.
Well, I understand you found the megalithic yard on your site. Can you explain that?
Yeah, the megalithic yard is a unit of measure that's used in megalithic sites in Europe, and it was discovered by Dr. Alexander Thom. He was an engineer at Oxford University and also at Glasgow, and he had a son named Dr. Archibald Thom, who actually, back starting in the 1930s, the father and son began going out and surveying many of the megaliths in Scotland, and then they started working their way across England, I think into Wales, Ireland, into France, and I'm trying to think of anywhere else they went, but they started mapping some of these thousands of megalithic sites. And while doing that, they started finding out that there's actually a unit of measure. When we build anything in the world, whether it's a car, boat, house, building, or whatever, use a yardstick, a ruler, or something to build it. And it appears that the ancient people were doing this, and the measurement equates to 32.64 inches using our ruler. Now, back in the 1930s, when Mr. Goodwin worked on our site, he hired an MIT engineer named Roscoe Whitney. And Roscoe actually set up a plane table, and he took profiles, cross-sections, and plan views of our site. And we still have all those diagrams today. He was very, very meticulous in doing this. He mentioned at one point, he said, whoever built this site, America Stonehenge, as it's now known, he said either didn't give a damn about linear measurements or knew nothing about them, because I've looked at inches, feet, and yards, and they were not used to build the site. And that was back 80 years ago. The megalithic yard, I think Dr. Thom began his work in the late 30s. I think by the 1950s he had discovered the megalithic yard. In the megalithic yard, actually, there's a rod called the megalithic rod. It's 2.5 megalithic yards. And then there's a fathom, which is a half a megalithic yard, and then a megalithic inch. We became aware of the megalithic yard on our site back in the 1970s. They built a diorama of the hilltop with the stone walls, about maybe 20 acres, with the stone walls where the astronomical alignments are, and the main site. And I did that, I think, in 76, 77. It's still in our museum today. We just updated it with the serpent walls and everything. And we had to make some measurements at the time. So I had some of the researchers and people up there helping me make a few measurements so I could make the model correctly. And what we found out, we seemed to find that we knew about the megalithic yard then. And we said, we think we might have the megalithic yard, but we didn't really take it any further. We didn't pursue it, but we kept it in the back of our mind. More recently, went up and started measuring some things with my son, who's an engineer, and another gentleman who's a landscape architect. He knows how to measure things very well. And we started doing some of the chambers over again and the structures, and including the sacrificial table and the groove on that thing. Some people thought, well, the groove is rectangular. It's actually trapezoid. And people thought, well, it's about 4 feet by 6 feet. So I went up and started measuring the width of it, and it does not come out in English measurements whatsoever. But it does come out, the width at the bottom of that groove is 1.5 megalithic yards. The top is 1.25, and the length of it is 2. And then we did the width of the table, and that came out to 2.5 at the bottom and 2 at the top. If you're looking at the table and you're looking to the east, the edge of the table near you to the bedrock comes out to 32.5 inches, which is about a megalithic yard. And it was quite a surprise, number one, that the groove is not rectangular, it's trapezoid, but also that it comes out to megalithic units. And I was rereading Dr. Thom's book, one of the books from 1967. It said you can divide the megalithic yard also into quarters, halves, and three-quarters, but never thirds. And that I read that after the fact we had measured. I'm like, God, it is 1.25, 1.5, 2.5, that kind of thing. I'm like, that's what we seem to be finding, not only the table, but some of the chambers. So it might be a strong piece of evidence that, again, that it's old world coming into the new world, because the megalithic yard was used in the megalithic sites, In Spain, they used a similar measurement, but it was called the Spanish Vera. And instead of 3.64, it's 32.64 inches. It's 32.68 inches. It's very, very close to a megalithic average, just a tiny, tiny bit bigger. And so all we need to do is do laser scanning on our site, and it would be objective. Bring in a laser scanner, scan the chambers, and then just feed in different measuring systems and see what comes out. I think that would be a great, piece of evidence, because we're doing it by hand, basically. And there's some errors, of course, but it does not, as Roscoe Whitney said back then, it does not come out with inches or feet, so it's not our imperial measuring system or metric or anything like that was used to build it.
Well, I know a lot of sites around the world, a lot of archaeologists and other people that study these sites talk about a lot of these megalithic sites and structures, maybe being portals or stargates. Well, what is your opinion about that?
Yeah, I've heard that too. Yeah, I mean, that's kind of interesting. I've just had some people up the other day. I was doing a little VIP tour, and they brought that subject up about portals, and I have seen that on a few TV shows. I mean, we have these windows, and I think they number 13 now. We found 13 of them, and the last one we found was in April. We had the History Channel up again doing a show that's going to be coming out next week. And while we were wrapping it up for the day, they were doing B-roll shots up there. We were walking down with the cameraman, and that one of the gentlemen who's a landscape architect said, "Hey, Dennis, I think you might have another window over there." And we looked over, and sure enough, we didn't videotape it because the guy had all his equipment put away. That would be kind of neat to find that and have the guy there shoot that for history. But we saw it, and it was like, oh, my God, it's just like the others, except there's a couple little flat stones laying. So they might be portals. There might be something that, are used for, I was on a radio show talking about these, and the lady was an MD, and she goes, I used to be a nurse in Texas, and I worked at a Catholic hospital. And she said I'd have a key to open and close windows to let fresh air in, close it, lock it, make sure nobody could, jump out or whatever. She goes, when the patient died, she said, sometimes the family would call me in when the patient was passing, and they'd ask me to open the window to let the spirit pass out. I had never heard that, and I mentioned to my wife after the show that night. She goes, oh, yeah, she had heard of that. And since then, I've talked to a lot of visitors at our museum, and about half of the people have heard of that. And that's a modern thing, opening up the window to let the spirit pass. And I'm wondering if these little portals might be something like that to let the spirit pass through it, that occurred to me as soon as I saw the first one, and now we have about 13 of them.
Oh, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I've heard of that too. That's a big thing down here. It's made pass to open up a window to supposedly let your spirit be able to fly out of the place. Right. So, but that's something. If they've done that thousands of years ago, so would that make these sites possibly burial sites?
Yeah, we think the site probably was, and as I mentioned, we had the V-hut that kind of looks like the wedge tombs of Ireland, which were used for burials, because of the style, the shape, the size, the orientation of it. And the east-west chamber, for instance, also, may have been a burial chamber. So I think the site, but I don't, even like if you heard of Newgrange in Ireland, they did find, the remains inside of there of people, but it was also a chamber that you could go in on the winter solstice and actually watch the sun. So it wasn't like closed off or sealed off like we might seal a tomb today. It was actually something that was still being used. They had some, remains of some of their deceased members in there inside it's cruciform in shape too, the inside of the Newgrange chamber in Ireland, and I believe it's the winter solstice sunrise. The sunrise is in the southeast, and the sun goes up on that particular day, and it goes through that 65-foot shaft. I've been in that chamber. You go 65 feet into that 300-foot diameter. It looks like a gigantic UFO. And then the sun rises through a window box. It illuminates the back of the chamber. And that cruciform shape is kind of cross-shaped. Might be another thing of the constellations, the constellation Cygnus, which some people call the Northern Cross. And it is shaped like a cross. And my dad and I were running around the hills in a landscape looking at these megalithic sites, and again, about 2,000 of them in Ireland alone. And I saw numerous structures shaped like a cross. I'm like, wow, this is pre-Christian by, a few thousand years. Why the cross shape? it might be they were looking at the heavens again, looking at that, Cygnus, the swan, or the Northern Cross, bringing that down to Earth, and making this construction in the shape of that. So as above, so below, they say, And when we were in Mexico a few times looking at some of the shapes of the chambers down there, there's a cruciform shape. Again, they might have been looking at Cygnus too, possibly. So we're looking at the heavens today to see if maybe even our wall patterns were, kind of shaped like some of the constellations or something like that. Because the walls make no sense at all at our site. They're not like what the farmers are doing. In New England, there's about 240,000 miles of walls built starting in the 1700s. The early colonial settlers, the very, very early ones, right after the Pilgrims, used usually wooden fences. And then the wall building begins sometime in the 1700s. And today, again, you could go to the moon, the amount of mileage we have for walls just in New England. It's the most of anywhere in the world. But we think we have ancient walls. And our walls are different. Our walls on our hilltop are different than the farmers' walls. They're usually linear, the farmers' walls, made out of a lot of rounded kind of field stones that the glaciers left. Our stone walls have a few of those round stones, but they have a lot of flat slabs, and these are the ones that were peeled off the bedrock, from a foot across to a couple feet across. And then the big ones, of course, were stood up. Some of those are the astronomical alignments. And then other ones are just stood on their side. We call them orthostats. They're just big flat slabs stood on end in the wall. And then some of the walls have windows. Some of the walls are shaped like serpents. And then some of the walls we found, again, just recently go from a glacial boulder, and then the wall will go to another glacial boulder, but instead of going straight like a farmer might do and just using those for references, they'll go off to the left or right in a zigzag pattern back and forth, which is crazy, to another boulder, and then they'll go off to another boulder. My wife called it the rosary bead walls, like connecting the boulders with walls. And this happens in Connecticut, too, and other sites in New England. Somebody went way out of the way to build these kind of walls that are not like the linear walls that our forefathers were building,
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm going to go back to the sacrifice stone. But what do you think the purpose of having human sacrifices was for, if that's what the stone was used for?
Yeah, first, we really don't know if that's what it was. It is about 9 feet long, roughly, by about 6 feet wide. Again, it doesn't really conform to English measurements, but approximately that. And it weighs about 4.5 tons or 9,000 pounds. And the groove, again, is it's just under 6 feet by about 4 feet. And it could hold an animal. It could hold a human being. We do know, like the ancient Phoenicians, they did sacrifice. Generally, small children, I believe, and the Celts had sacrifices, and other cultures did it too. It's in the Bible. And over here, too, there were sacrifices found in some of the, excavations, and they can tell even some of the mounds out west, some of the skeletal remains and some of the, I think there were close to 1 million mounds at one time in the United States. Today, there's between 100 and 200,000 remaining. And in some of the mounds, when they did excavations, they found some of the skeletal remains appeared to be sacrificed. And they can tell, when they do the whole forensic thing, they can tell, So it was probably just, it was an offering to the gods or goddesses or whatever. And sometimes in some cultures, it was for somebody to do that was a great sacrifice to themselves, but also a privilege, I guess. I remember in Mexico, the cenotes, they would weigh down some of the sacrificial victims, and they would weigh them down with gold and throw them into the cenote, and they'd be, into the water, and they were drowned in there, So it wasn't, it wasn't unusual for different cultures to do this. But the table, I mean, it's amazing when you look at the size of this thing, and it's set up the way it is on 4 legs next to the oracle chamber. And if you're looking at it from the platform, you're looking east, true east. And you're looking towards the oracle chamber. To your right side, there's a big, tall, vertical stone. It's a monolith stood up. And on the left side, there's one that's very similar to it. The one on the right is a little wider. The one on the left is a little narrower. And in Europe, the narrow one would be a male fertility symbol, and the wider hip one on the would be a female. So you might have the duality there, male and female, on each side of the sacrificial table. There is a site called, it's Shutesbury, Massachusetts, 75 miles southwest of our site. It has chambers, and it's called Mount Mineral. And there are chambers still there today. And then years ago, a farmer, I guess, overturned this stone, and it's a carving. And this carving is actually, it's a raised carving or carving in relief. They call it an anaglyph. And it looks just like our table. It's got the same bell shape to it. On it has a human being with legs spread, covering most of the table, so it would have been a very big human being if it was to scale. By the front left leg is right in front of it. There's a circle, like a lip of a vase. And on our table, the groove on it, I mentioned that big groove that goes, right, trapezoid groove, there is a runnel on the left side of the table. If you were laying with your back on the table by your left foot, the runnel goes off, and right below that there's a cutout in the bedrock where perhaps either a ceramic or stone or even something like a gourd vase could collect the fluid. And we poured water on it before, and it goes right off the runnel, right down into where that cutout in the bedrock is. And if you put a bucket in there or a vase, it would actually collect the fluid. That anaglyph looks like somebody came up, saw something on our table, and they went back to one of these other sites in New England, and then they did that Kodak moment thing by carving this anaglyph, Well, that is now that's the NERA, the New England Antiquities Research Association logo, and they adopted that in 1964. I think the year that they were founded, they took that stone and they made that their logo of NERA. So if you look up NERA.org, you'll see that logo there, and that looks like our table, the bell shape, the person, and by the neck of the person, by the way, there seems to be something. It's either like jewelry, like a necklace, or there's something holding that person like a rope, It's carved right across the neck. It's kind of weird. But that's the only thing I'd say. And other people have said that stone looks like it's a birthing table, a slaughter table, a sacrificial table, or just an altar like in a church. And there's been a few other things too. People said it's a cider press and lye stone for making soap. The table, if it was a lye stone, it's the biggest one I've ever seen. They're usually about 36 to 40 inches across, and you could pick it up by your hand. You could pick it up yourself. This lye stone, and it has a very shallow, round groove on it. Our groove is deep, and it's trapezoid, and it's huge. And some people say, well, maybe the table was a cider press. It was a cider mill up there. We have no archaeological historical record of the Patty family ever doing that, but some critics still say, oh, yeah, well, it must be still. It can't be anything else. It's got to be a cider press. Usually they're made out of wood, like at Sturbridge Village in Massachusetts has a great example of that. But there's no archaeological evidence of any of that apparatus being found there. And again, no historical record. And the nearest apple grove was about a half a mile down the hill. So you'd have to take all your apples, put them in a wagon with a horse, and drag them all the way up this big hill. And when you get to the site, you can't get your horse in there with your wagon. It's between where the sacrificial table is. I can't even get my ATV in there to get the leaves out each year. I have to rake them all away from there. So if you're bringing up a bunch of apples to be pressed and then take all the pulp away plus all the product, you can't get in there with a horse, in a wagon. So I don't know, what their reasoning is on that, but it's been called a cider press too.
Well, is there a glacial cliff shelter on site? And if so, what was it used for?
Yeah, that's actually kind of neat. It's on the west side. It's overlooking what we call the Spigot River. Spigot River is a tributary of the Merrimack River I mentioned earlier in the program. And so you could go from the ocean up to about 5 miles of our site, and then you'd have to do portages up, and then eventually up the Spigot River to our site today. The glacial cliff shelter was excavated back in the late 1950s. Also, my dad was involved with that and some other archaeologists. And they found a beautiful bowl down there, one of the things. And they found other, artifacts too. But one of them is about a foot across. It's a middle woodland period ceramic bowl. It was in pieces. They did glue it back together, and it's about a foot across. And so it dates between 2,000 and 2,500 years. And then they found some other pieces of pottery and a few other things in that glacial cliff shelter. And what they want to do eventually is work it's been over 55, almost 60 years, I guess they've excavated that. We would someday like to get down to the bottom of the cliff because, like at Mesa Verde out in Colorado, when we visited that, when people lived inside the cliff dwelling, they would throw their trash over the front. It would go down over the front of the cliff, towards the bottom. And that area hasn't been looked at yet. And I would think that would be a really good area, a good candidate for an excavation down there sometime, because people would throw their stuff over the front. Back then, the hilltop was pretty bare, we think. The hill is covered with forest today, but the hilltop probably was pretty bare. And the reason we thought that, but we also did a study of shovel test pits. It was done by the New Hampshire Archaeological Society's president at the time. She spent 6 years while she was president, and after she's still a member today and on the board, but 30 years later almost. She worked across the hilltop doing all these shovel test pits. It's a 50-centimeter square hole, and they go down to hit a pre-occupational level like clay or bedrock. And if they discover anything, they'll stop and lay out the meter squares and the divide that into little quadrants and use toothbrushes and trowels and go very carefully from then on. But she said basically the hilltop from those, I think she did 70 of them, and we have 110 acres, so she did almost one per acre, just a little bit less. She said the hilltop was probably 75% bare, 25% covered with soil. And so the astronomical alignments would have shown up very nicely. The trees wouldn't have been a factor back then. If there were just a few of them to get rid of. Also, when you sent out a crew to look for stones to quarry to build the stone walls and all the structures, you would just see bare bedrock, and you could go out and say, this is a great area. Look at the rock is cracked. We can work it. If you sent the crew out today on our hill, there are some exposed bedrock areas, but most of the hilltop, probably 95%, is just covered with forest and soil today. It'd be very difficult to go out and discover, an area that should be quarried. You go like, where am I going to dig? I don't know. It's all covered with earth today. And
Right.
all the drains in the site, I mentioned the drainage. There's about 12 drains. Some of them run 75 feet. If you don't have soil on the main site or anywhere, the water will puddle up on the bedrock and it will stay there until it evaporates. So what they did is they channeled the bedrock. They actually cut through the bedrock in some areas, and these channels are like a couple inches across, maybe an inch or two deep. And then those little channels run into underground drains. In fact, some of them are almost big enough for a kid to get into. They have walls and flat slabs, just like when you're building a big chamber, but on a small scale. And some of those run up to 75 feet. So the site was very well engineered to take care of water problems. And again, the drains, possibly 4,000 years old, they still work today.
Wow. Well, is the site located on any ley lines?
It might be. I mean, that's something that people are very interested in. We have had people there, like we have a booklet put out in 1978. Francis Hitching, John Mitchell, and there was a gentleman named Edward Krupp from the Griffith Observatory contributed to that pamphlet. They all contributed different articles, but we were one of the main features in the article. One of the main articles, I should say, that were featured. And what they did is they went up and they doused the walls, a lot of the stone walls. And what they said is this is where the water is underneath the walls. That was their conclusion on that. But the astronomical alignments were ley lines. They were straight lines. And one of the ones they drew in kind of a heavy pen, like a really dark, mark, was the summer solstice sunrise. And that's the one that my son found out by using Google Earth 6 years ago. Actually, that alignment. So if you're standing at the astronomical center of the site and you go through what is actually a stone circle, it's an elliptical shaped circle, which we think is original, with a stone in the middle, and you go through that, and then you go through one of those standing stone monoliths, and then you continue for 3,200 miles. I think it was 3,200. You'll end up going right through the center of Stonehenge. It goes right through one of the trilithons at Stonehenge. It's pretty amazing. It's right on the money, and that was discovered in 2012. After that, we just played around with a map, Google Maps, and we looked at some of the other alignments. And what I found out, and people can correct us if we're wrong, the equinox sunrise goes right through the Canary Island pyramids, which many people don't know exist, but on the Canary Islands there are truncated pyramids. The true south alignment goes through Machu Picchu in Peru, and then the winter solstice sunset goes through the moon pyramid at Teotihuacan, just north of Mexico City. And my dad and I went there back in the early 80s, but we were pretty amazed by that. It's like right through the moon, not the sun pyramid, but the moon pyramid. And then the equinox sunset goes through Chaco Canyon, the ruins out in New Mexico, which are amazing. And in fact, we're going to try to get out there in September to visit those. So we have these alignments with other pretty amazing sites. Some of these are UNESCO World Heritage sites, and some of our astronomical alignments go right through them, thousands of miles away. I mentioned Newgrange in Ireland. On the winter solstice, the sun comes up through that structure, and I believe it's about 10 miles away, out of sight, is a site called Fornox, and it's one of these ancient megalithic sites that's probably over 5,000 years old. Well, that alignment goes right through there too, and that was discovered a number of years ago. You can't see it you can't see it with your eyes, but it is perfectly right on that alignment. It's just shorter than our 3,200 mile one, but they were even doing that in Ireland at some of these sites. They're right perfectly in line with one another, and so some people refer to that as a ley line.
Wow. Well, has anyone had any paranormal experiences on the site? And if so, can you explain?
Yeah, we had different psychics. Hans Holzer was there back in the 70s. He came up in 71, 74, and then 76. And in 74, he brought up 4 different psychics during the course of the year. And they actually, he wrote a book in 1992, about 20 years later, and he talks about each of the experiences, what they saw, felt, and basically they all had something similar. And I read the book in the last year, but I forget some of the details now. But their experience of what they thought the people may have looked like, and I think there were 2 different types of people. There was like a taller, lighter complexion person, and I think a little shorter, a little darker complexion, I think. And it was funny that they didn't know each other. It was before the age of the internet and everything and Facebook and all that. But they didn't know each other, and they came in different parts of that whole year in 1974, and they said something similar, about what the site might be, what it was used for, the age of it, who the people were, that kind of thing. So that was kind of interesting. And some of it was general stuff, and some of it was a little more specific, And Hans also came back in 76, and he wrote the episode for Leonard Nimoy's In Search Of. And then we had Betty Hill visit us around that time, too. That's how we met her. But in the fall, we usually have, in October and in late September, we have paranormal walks on our site. And we've had people like, Jeff Belanger has been up, too. I don't know if you're familiar with Jeff.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, he's writes for Ghost Adventures. He's a writer, and he's written many books, and he's been up there, and he brought one of the Ghost Adventure gentlemen up that lives in the area, and he visited us. But in the fall, we have different people that will actually come up and they'll conduct a ghost walk, and they use different types of equipment. And when I was flying, I missed almost all of that for years because I usually work Friday through Monday. I get the best trips for the airline, the best paying trips and the nicest trips. I worked almost every weekend. So I get the miss. Usually it was on Saturday nights. So my wife and my daughter and my son got to see most of that. So I was kind of out of the loop on those. But yeah, we're still interested in that. And we've had people up there just recently that may come back and do something this fall.
Oh, awesome. Well, have you made any new discoveries on the site?
Well, just the ones we kind of mentioned, the serpent walls. We got 13. Windows, and we also have the megalithic yard we're looking at. Although we kind of thought we might back in the 70s. I'm pretty sure we did with all the work we've done recently on the megalithic yard on the site. And so in the quarried stones, we knew of about probably about a dozen of them up to about maybe 3 or 4 years ago, and then we found roughly about 20 more. So those are pretty much the new discoveries at our site. And a couple of stones that seem to be sculptured stones. One of them seems to have a face on it. It could be natural, or it could be partly touched up by man. It has lips, nose, and a forehead, and like an eye. And then another one we call the goddess, and it looks just like a female looking kind of from the back. It has all the parts on it. And that was found actually last fall by some of the New England Antiquities Research Association meeting was over in Nashua, New Hampshire, and they had the field trip at our place. Some of the members were on a tour I was giving, and then a couple of them fell behind, and they went on did their own little thing. And later, towards the end of the day, we were closing the place up, and they came down late, and I was like, "Where you guys been?" Anyway, they showed me some pictures, and it was of that what we call the goddess stone, and it looks like a pregnant woman, and it's amazing. I like to have a geologist look at it and somebody that really knows. Petroglyphs, to see, in fact, if it's natural, all man-made, or maybe natural and part of it's been touched up by man, and that has happened too in the past at some of these inscriptions. But those are pretty much the most recent things we found. We're still looking at the astronomy, though, at the site, for sure. There's 23 more alignments that they told us in 1978, the Harvard-Smithsonian report, that we have. We had a gentleman, he was a doctor of astronomy, archaeoastronomy from Penn State. And a little over 20 years ago, he began driving from Penn State all the way up here to New Hampshire every few weeks, and he was doing research on the site. And he was actually starting to get into locating these other alignments that the Harvard-Smithsonian report said we had. And unfortunately, about 2002, he suddenly passed away. I think he had a heart attack. And so he was a really nice guy, and it was like a kind of a blow to us that he passed. It's like, wow, he's gone. But he was kind of getting into that, and that is not done today. It's not complete. So we still have to look at the star rising and star setting over certain monoliths. We just haven't, we need somebody that's an expert in that to come up, I think, and work on that again.
Hmm. Well, why do you have alpacas on the site?
Well, they look like something from Star Wars, but we've had them for about since 2002, 17 years, and we've had a few that are born there, and we all have names for them. We just got 4 new ones in recently, and but most people don't know that that their ancestors are actually the North American camel, and although these animals are down in South America with the vicuna, guanaco, and the llama today, originally their ancestors were here in the United States, part of Canada, and I guess Mexico, up to the Arctic Circle. So all the camels in the world were here on this continent for about 45 million years, and these animals, alpaca, are part of that family. And eventually, I think between 2 and 3 million years ago, they migrated through Mexico and through Panama into South America. They also migrated to Alaska, into Russia or Siberia, in that direction. Ended up, people think when you talk about a camel, where they came from, oh yeah, it came from Africa or Asia, is what most people think. And then the alpacas, well, where are they from? South America. But United States had them, and they were here up to maybe about 8,000 years ago. Their ancestors were.
Okay.
Part of the educational thing we got going on. Yeah, we have pyramids in the United States too. People go. I ask the children when they come in on field trips, "What do you think the nearest pyramids are?" And because Egypt, and then I say, "What do you think camels came from?" And they say Egypt. So Egypt gets a lot of credit. And they got some amazing things there, but actually, again, the camels are from here, and we have somewhere between 100 and 200,000 mounds, and they're either pyramidal mounds or they're effigy mounds shaped like animals, or they're geometric mounds, like some of the ones in Ohio, particularly like near Newark. So we have the most pyramids and these are huge, like the ones in Cahokia in Illinois. I mean, these things are massive. The Monk's Mountain, and that site is called America's Woodhenge, because it had a wooden circle aligned with the sun on the quarter and cross-quarter days, similar to one of the wooden hinges near Stonehenge, which I've seen. They have a couple of them there, and made out of wood originally, and they predated Stonehenge, from what I understand, the Sanctuary and Woodhenge. So they nicknamed Cahokia after that. 120 pyramids, covering over 4,000 acres originally, and Monk's Mound was 16 acres just for that one pyramid, which is about 3 acres bigger than the Great Pyramid of Cheops in Egypt. Not as tall, but it's huge. And on the Harmonic Convergence in 1987, we had 1,000 people showed up suddenly at our site. People all across the country, Mount Shasta people showed up, but Cahokia had something like 4,000 people, from what I understand, and they went on top of that upper level. It's like a wedding cake, and it accommodated over 4,000 people on top. That's how big that thing is. So we have pyramids here too, and they don't teach that in schools, which is really a shame.
Yeah, they don't teach a lot in school. They should.
Exactly. Yeah.
Well, has your site ever been shown on or documented on like a TV shows or movies or any books?
Yeah, a lot of them actually, Rodney. Yeah, I mean, Gudrun wrote, the first book on the site called The Ruins of Great Ireland and New England in 1946. In 1907, The History of Salem was written by a guy named Edgar Gilbert. He was a friend of Robert Frost, the poet, and he wrote about the history of Salem, and we're mentioned in that particular book. But we've been on like a show 1970, The Unexplained. It was an NBC special, and the host and narrator was Arthur C. Clarke and Rod Serling, and we got on that. We were pretty fortunate. So 50 years ago this fall, the company was Lee Mendelson Productions, and they do Snoopy and all of that. But they came out and did this documentary, and we were very fortunate to be part of that show. And then, then Leonard Nimoy did us 6 years later on In Search Of. And then, a little bit later, Edward Mulhare, Ghost of Mrs. Muir fame, he did a show on us for A&E. So over the years, we've had a lot of these, shows, and Scott Walters did us 6 years ago, and we've been on Arthur Kent's show, History's Mysteries, and William Shatner did us too about 7 years ago, and a show called Weird or What, and he did a really nice job on the questions, and he kind of dug into what the site could be and everything. He did a good job on that particular episode, and he's got a new show starting on history coming up called The Unexplained, just like the name of the show we were on with Rod Serling and Arthur C. Clarke. He'll be on a new show. We're hoping maybe he'll think about us for an update,
Okay, awesome. Well,
yeah.
I love William Shatner.
Yeah. I know.
Big Star
That'd be
Trek
great.
fan.
Yeah, me too. Yeah, I never thought that after watching that in the '60s, I never thought they'd be talking about our site, but both of them did a story on us, so it was pretty cool.
Shatner and Nimoy. Whew, lucky.
Yep, both of them. Yep. And I think Nimoy show's coming back.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead. Oh, I was just say they got a new version of the In Search of Coming that came out last year, and I don't know if we'll have another run, but it was a new Spock, Zachary Quinto. So another possibility, to get on an updated show that was from 40 years ago. That'd be pretty cool. But I'm sorry, Rodney, you had a question?
Well, what I was going to say was that if Shatner comes back, I might have to take a drive up there and that weekend and come by and see you all for sure.
Well, I'll let you know, and you can beam over.
Beam me over.
Yeah. We'll make it. I would definitely send something to you for that. Yeah. And we will be on History Channel next week next week at the end of the week. I guess we can't say too much because of the contract, but we'll be on next week at the very end of the week. So there'll be a new little episode on us. And the cool thing about that show, I do know, is they're going to be showing some of the other sites, because you were mentioning other sites around here. They're going to show some of the Hudson Valley sites, and there are many of them down there, and some of them are pretty amazing structures with, monoliths stood up in front of the entrance, these big tall, almost like a small obelisk, stood in front. It probably astronomically aligned with what it looks like. But they're going to be showing some of them on that show, and then they're going to cut to us, I think, and show the table and some of the other features too. So that will be on next week, which is kind of exciting for us.
Well, I've spoke to a lot of people that either lives in the Hudson Valley or done a lot of research in the Hudson Valley, from UFOs to Bigfoots and ancient sites. What is it about the Hudson Valley that's so special?
I don't know. It's got a lot, though. That's for sure. Yeah, the UFO thing, and there's a lot of chambers there, and even in the Woodstock, a little bit further west of Woodstock, and they have some of the serpent walls in the Hudson Valley, and then if you get out to Bethel, Monticello, and Woodstock, which is the 50th year anniversary of the Woodstock Festival, right in that area, there's chambers, but there's also some of those serpent walls too, which, I've been out in that area and I didn't get a chance to see them. I wish I had now, but it's a pretty big country out there. You have to kind of know where you're going because there's a lot of woods there, But these structures are all around that area.
Well, have you used or had anyone come in and use any ground penetration devices? And if so, have they found anything?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, 20 years ago, a little bit more than 20 years ago, there was a company that's moved about 18 miles away that were basically our neighbors. And there were two companies. One of them had the sonar, and that sonar was used actually to find the Titanic back around 1985, I think it was, with Robert Ballard. And their sister company had the sonar, the radar, the ground penetration radar, and they would bring it up to our site, and they would work with our archaeologist, that lady I mentioned, the past president of the Hampshire Archaeological Society, and they ran it over, and they found a couple fire pits. And that's really good, because fire pits you can radiocarbon date, and fire pits can tell you a story. They actually detected that. They also ran it over some of our underground drains, just to see what the image would look like, on the monitors, with our drainage system, in case they ran it over other places and found the same kind of thing. They also have an area to the west of the site. It's not too far from our Equinox alignment boulder, and they said that you have an area here. It's about the size of that chamber in ruins, as I mentioned, which is about 10 feet by about maybe 6 feet. They said you have a cavity in here, and it could be a chamber below us, or it could be a natural fault in the bedrock, but it's rectangular roughly, and it's about so big, about the size of it. I said, well, as far as we know, this is solid bedrock that just goes down miles and miles and miles. And that archaeologist, her husband was a doctor of geology at Tufts University for 30 years. So he had his doctorates in that, so he was pretty knowledgeable. And she was too of the geology, living with him, But anyway, what I thought was just solid bedrock. And we've never actually done a shovel test pit there. That's something we have to do. They said, you have a hole here under the ground. And if you stomp on it, it sounds hollow. So this is something that it may turn out to be nothing, but something we should, pursue, I think, and see what, is it natural? Is it man-made? And if it's either one, why is it there? because it's a big flat area, and then you can see bedrock exposed still and part of, to the side, So the penetration radar is pretty neat, and now they use laptops. It's very powerful, and I think the images on all these squiggly lines that had to be interpreted back in the 90s, I think they actually come up with images, So if it's like a 55-gallon drum in the ground, they'll see it, So, but we've also used LiDAR, and LiDAR is another great tool. It strips away the forest. And we had another gentleman that was living in this area. Now he's moved out to Minnesota, but he had like a thermal imaging camera that was like a $12,000 camera, and he had a high-definition color camera that was very expensive, and this expensive drone, and he was doing using both cameras, not at the same time, but the newest technology can actually have both high definition and the thermal imaging together, which was his next purchase, I guess. But anyway, you can actually, he's mapped the whole hilltop with thousands and thousands of photographs, and what he's going to do is combine them using the software. He has to rent it for a few $100 a month, and combine it. You'll have a 3D 1 square mile image of the site. And the neat thing, he said, is on ideal conditions, the thermal imaging camera can go underneath the earth maybe about 14 inches, not too far, but if you have some hidden features there that you can't see on the surface, it actually would detect them. Then you could get in there with an archaeologist and, do some shovel test bits or whatever. So we're still waiting for that now. So that's something that we've, been working on for the last 2 years. So he's just got to compile all that data, I guess,
Oh, okay. Well, is the site historically protected?
Well, it is. Yeah, it's not by. Well, it is by us. It's been in our family for 61 years. It is a state historic site. It was made a New Hampshire State Historic Site in 1971, and it just affords us a little more recognition. Dr. Winkler from Penn State, the gentleman that we were talking about, he actually was working on one of his things is to get us on the National Register of Historic Sites. And that, again, gets you more recognition. It might get you a little more protection, particularly, if it gets into politics and stuff like that for protection. When that comes up, it's like, oh, it's an important site. Plus, it gets you a listing, and more people will see it, and more people will visit, because of the listing, which is good. But he passed away, like I say, suddenly, so that project was dropped, as well as looking for those other star alignments. So that was, that was about 17 years ago, I think that happened. But, yeah, we're not a World Heritage Site, UNESCO World Heritage Site either. So, like Machu Picchu, if you get that, too, that really gets you a lot of attention worldwide, So, and our big thing is just getting people interested in visiting us because we're self-supported, basically. We pay taxes. We're a for-profit business, but like my dad said for many years, it didn't feel that way. Because he worked for 30 years at the AT&T Bell Laboratories, and I did 35 at the airline, so we rented on the side. And we really love the place. We want to keep it going like this, hopefully forever if we can.
Right. Well, what's your plan for the rest of 2019? Do you have any other projects you're going to be working on site and anything like that that you can discuss?
Yeah, well, writing a book. My dad's book was written in 2003, and it's not only out of print. We sold the last one not too long ago. Several months ago, we sold the last one, but it was out of date too because it didn't contain the windows we talked about. All the quarried stones that we found, the serpentine walls, none of that was in there. And even the megalithic yard, we're going to discuss that a little bit more in the new book. I think the book will be out, this winter. That's what we're hoping for, because I'm working in it. And we also just put out a brand new book, too, a few months ago. It's a new souvenir book. It's got a lot of nice photographs. It replaced a souvenir book from 1996. And the other thing we're kind of working on is two more things. Our archaeologist is actually looking for a habitat site. Where did these people live? If they lived on the hill at all, it'd be probably lower on the hill, away from the main site, down on there's some plateau areas where you could actually, put some sort of wooden structures, like wigwam or longhouse or whatever. She actually found a workshop in 1992. It's a workshop is where they were making tools, and some of the material came from just north of Boston, Massachusetts. So it was imported about 30 miles to our site. I think it was rhyolite, and they identified its quarry out of, just north of Boston. They knew where it came from. Somebody brought it up here, and they make it. That might be a great indication of where somebody was living. So that was over 25 years ago, and she's got to get back. She's trying to get back in after a quarter of a century to get back in there. And she has another archaeologist from the New Hampshire Archaeological Society that's kind of interested, a younger person, who she brought up and showed a couple of features up there that are very interesting, actually. And so we may have some new people getting interested in. And then she has a couple of assistants, too, you know. So we want to look for where were these people living, you know, a habitat site. And the other thing, we're doing a forest management program with a licensed forester, and we're going to thin out the entire hilltop. And for the first time, and that'll be this winter, but we've been working on it for about a year and 2 months. We have a 30-page plan, and they're going to thin out the entire hilltop, remove any invasive species. We're going to be kind of careful about wildlife habitat and certain animals that are almost extinct. We're going to be sure we can help them out. But we're going to open up the avenues more for the alignments. They need to be widened to see the sun actually setting properly on these stones. And we have never opened up the lunar major standstills north and south since 1967. And the next one I think I might have mentioned earlier is 2025. We have the lunar major north and south. It's every 18 and a half years. So this is the next cycle of that. We should have it done this winter, and then we'll have to wait a couple of years and actually watch the moon actually rise and set over a couple of these stones for the first time ever. So that's something we're working on probably November into December when the ground's dry and it's kind of getting into the frozen stage, because they're going to come up with some pretty big equipment. They did part of North Stonington. They did 100 acres where some of those 8,000 features are, and everybody's reported back that they did a magnificent job. They didn't damage any of the structures, and they got the trees away from the walls, because the walls are being damaged by trees falling on them and uprooting. That's the most damage. Is not earthquakes or frost, because the walls are sitting on bedrock, but it's the tree damage that's causing a lot of it. And people might not be aware that most of Connecticut was, you know, when the first settlers came in, Europeans, it was all bare. There was very few trees there. So the forest down there that's around this North Stonington probably was, you know, wasn't there when these structures were being made. And now the trees are actually causing damage. So they kind of thinned out the forest and got the trees away from the walls. And then you can do some really nice aerial drone shots of the walls and the serpentine shapes and all of that thing. You know, that's what we want to do at our site too.
Well, do you have a website where people can go? And if anyone has any concerns, questions, thoughts, or comments, you know, how can they get in touch with you? And also, how can they get a copy of your book or books?
Yeah. Oh, okay. Yeah, the souvenir book is, I think it's on Amazon already, and we have it at our bookstore. The new book will be the same when it comes out. We actually just have I have a couple working titles, so I don't even know what I'm going to call it yet. I haven't settled on that. But the souvenir book is already out there. It's selling through Amazon. We're selling a couple of them a day at our museum, which is very nice. But we have a website at StonehengeUSA.com. There's an email address in there if they want to email us for a question. There's also a phone number there that can contact us. We're also on Facebook and Instagram, and you know, so if anybody, you know, wants to get a hold of us, there's a couple of different ways of doing that, and we try to answer every question, you know, or any issue or something like that people send to us. And again, we'll be on, you know, History Channel next week if people are watching. It will be on Friday, I think Friday night, and yeah, please send your questions. You know, that's what we're there for.
Well, Dennis, I want to thank you so much for coming on the show. I know you're a busy man, and it sounds like you're doing a wonderful job up there. I'd love to come to see it sometime. Yeah, again, thank you, you know, for coming to spend a couple of hours with me and talking about this. It's like I said, this is fascinating. Stuff like this has always fascinated me since I was a kid.
Well, thank you so much, Rodney. I didn't think it was quite 2 hours. It went by so fast. And if I hear about William Shatner coming up to do it, you know, doing a show on it sometime, I'll definitely send you a email on that. Hopefully that does. I hope it does anyway. I will.
Your trash cans for free.
Oh, well, we love to. Yeah, you could do that too. Yeah. well, thank you so much, Rodney. It was a real joy talking to you tonight. And I've listened to some of your other shows with, I think it was Heather Arnold. I know her. You know, she talked about the sites down there in New York and everything. So, kind of a community of people interested in this. You know, so it's kind of neat.
Oh yeah, I've had show a couple of times. She came down last year. We have a Phantom Fest. I just started actually last year, and this is our second year. And Heather, before she even left, she's like, if you do it again, I'm signed up right now for speaker. I'm like, okay.
Oh, that's excellent. Yeah, that's great. I guess I'll have to make my way over there to see that too. And I got another friend that's going to be on your show pretty soon, Haley. She'll be upcoming, I think, eventually. And we're in a lot of communications with her. So a lot of really interesting people out there, So, and that's why we like doing this.
And for me, I'm into paranormal, but I think the paranormal, ancient sites, UFO encounters, crypto, somehow, I don't know how, but I know all this connects somehow.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Rodney. I agree with you.
Well, thank you, sir. You have a good night and have a great weekend.
You too, Rodney. Thank you, and thank all your listeners. Have a nice week. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Well, again, I want to thank Dennis Stone for coming on the show. Nothing but respect for the job he's doing up there. And we welcome him back anytime. Next Thursday night, July 18th, our special guest will be the Haunted MD, Dr. Donald. And if I tear your last name up, I do apologize. Moner. So, yeah, I don't think I said that right. But anyway, I'm sure he'll correct me next week. So everyone, have a great weekend. Be safe. Have a good night. Have nothing but love. And thank you all for listening. And I won't just, I apologize about the ding-a-dong, but I keep getting these pop-ups in there, aggravating me to death. That's it for us tonight. I want to thank everyone that took the time to listen in. I'd like to give a big shout out to the Vibe Radio Network and to Ryan for putting up with us. Also to all the first responders and our men and women in the armed services, thank you for your service and the sacrifices that you and your families make every day to keep our great nation safe. Tune in next week to another exciting show starting at 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Everyone can go to our Facebook page Within the Chaos, and don't forget to like our page to see upcoming guests along with past shows, postings, or you can also go to my website at www.blackdiamondps.org or blogtalkradio.com/Vibe Radio Network. Also, we have a YouTube channel, so go to YouTube. Look up Within the Chaos for past shows. Thanks again. Until next week, everyone have a safe weekend and have a good night. And love you all. Be careful out there.
I'm sorry. But I don't want to be an emperor. That's not my business. I don't want to rule or conquer anyone. I should like to help everyone if possible. Jew, Gentile, black man, white. We all want to help one another. Human beings are like that. We want to live by each other's happiness, not by each other's misery. We don't want to hate and despise one another. In this world, there's room for everyone, and the good earth is rich and can provide for everyone. The way of life can be free and beautiful, but we have lost the way. Greed has poisoned men's souls, has barricaded the world with hate, has goose-stepped us into misery and bloodshed. We have developed speed, but we have shut ourselves in. Machinery that gives abundance has left us in want. Our knowledge has made us cynical, our cleverness hard and unkind. We think too much and feel too little. More than machinery, we need humanity. More than cleverness, we need kindness and gentleness. Without these qualities, life will be violent, and all will be lost. The aeroplane and the radio have brought us closer together. The very nature of these inventions cries out for the goodness in men, cries out for universal brotherhood, for the unity of us all. Even now, my voice is reaching millions throughout the world, millions of despairing men, women, and little children, victims of a system that makes men torture and imprison innocent people. To those who can hear me, I say, do not despair. The misery that is now upon us is but the passing of greed, the bitterness of men who fear the way of human progress. The hate of men will pass, and dictators die, and the power they took from the people will return to the people. And so long as men die, liberty will never perish. Soldiers, don't give yourselves to brutes, men who despise you, enslave you, who regiment your lives, tell you what to do, what to think, or what to feel, who drill you, diet you, treat you like cattle, use you as cannon fodder. Don't give yourselves to these unnatural men, machine men with machine minds and machine hearts. You are not machines, you are not cattle, you are men. You have the love of humanity in your hearts. You don't hate, only the unloved hate, the unloved and the unnatural. Soldiers, don't fight for slavery, fight for liberty. In the 17th chapter of St. Luke it is written, the kingdom of God is within man, not one man nor a group of men, but in all men, in you. You, the people, have the power to create machines, the power to create happiness. You, the people, have the power to make this life free and beautiful, to make this life a wonderful adventure. Then in the name of democracy, let us use that power. Let us all unite. Let us fight for a new world, a decent world, that will give men a chance to work, that will give youth a future and old age a security. By the promise of these things, brutes have risen to power, but they lie. They do not fulfill that promise. They never will. Dictators free themselves, but they enslave the people. Now let us fight to fulfill that promise. Let us fight to free the world, to do away with national barriers, to do away with greed, with hate and intolerance. Let us fight for a world of reason, a world where science and progress will lead to all men's happiness. Soldiers, in the name of democracy, let us